I'm Olena Trehub, and this is Shaping Davos discussion, brought to you by the World Economic Forum's Global Shapers Hub in Kyiv. We want to thank Hromadske TV for providing us with their platform for today's televised debate. Hromadske TV is a web-based television created by journalists, run by journalists, and owned by journalists. And if you're interested in objective coverage of Ukraine in English, Hromadske International is the best source for you. Shaping Davos is an event which is being broadcasted around the world and comes to you from 40 cities around the globe. Our discussions today will be focused on the future of governance in Ukraine, on rethinking politics in Ukraine, a very relevant topic for today's Ukraine after all the dramatic events it went through. And before we start our discussion with the young leaders of Ukrainian government, parliament, I want to remind you about the recent events that Ukraine had to go through this year.
На, смотри,
там в кармане дубины не носят.
Да, что-то есть.
Все нормально, все, пошли.
The European Union and Ukrainian relations as
EU-Ukraine Association Agreement, Vilnius, 29 of November.
Старт був важким, але фініш буде переможним. Слава Європі! Слава Україні!
I urge you not to let Ukraine stand alone in the face of this aggression.
Спасибо, вы лучшие.
для реалізації як цієї коаліційної угоди я окремо хотів би зазначити і подякувати за ту плідну роботу, яка була зроблена політичними силами в відкритому і професійному режимі.
Цій угоді дуже велика частина присвячена миру.
Аудиторія прекрасна. Взагалі, коли граєш не для спеціалістів, а для простих людей, які сприймають музику, ну, як діти.
Дуже чудово, побільше би таких спонтанних акцій. правди. Хочеться за краще життя для наших дітей, онуків.
Для дітей. Для таких дітей, як цей.
So today in the studio, I will have an incredible group of leaders for you. They are all having different jobs, different roles in the society. I have representatives of the parliament, of the cabinet, of the foreign service, of the civil society, the media. But what they have in common is that they are young and smart, and they work day by day to build a new country. And let us start with introducing the first panel. From the left to the right, I have with me here Dmytro Kuleba. He is the ambassador at large at the Ukrainian MFA. We have Volodymyr Omelian. He is the Deputy Minister of Infrastructure. And we have Hanna Hopko. She is a member of parliament and the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee. And let us start by reflecting a little bit on the video, on the footage that we just saw. Do you think that the recent events, the revolution, the Crimea annexation, the war, influenced somehow Ukrainian governance, Ukrainian officials? Do they become more responsible? Do they want change more than before? Do they have more unity? And please speak about your observations in general, but also about your own experience. What do you feel about this?
Thank you, Olena, a lot for the invitation, and I'm very pleased to be here with you all. I'm really impressed by this movie. It recalls me every second I spent in Maidan and all these terrific moments I had there, sometimes dramatic, sometimes tragic ones. Government is different, it's for sure, but not everybody. So we work hardly on it, and my downtime times helps me a lot to keep myself motivated. Every morning I wake up early, go to the work, and I know that I do my job right. This is the best motivation I have ever. I don't even need some money or some food or drink for that. But definitely war is ongoing, and it's not only about war with Russians, but it's about war inside each person of Ukrainian society. So we should change them mentally. We should make them go forward, go west. And it's not so easy as we can think about that. It's really challenge. For each one, we should talk to them, we should convince them that there is a different way of working, different way of attitude towards your life environment, and many things you have to change before you be successful.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Well, I think the year of 2013 was a real life changer for Ukrainians. It was not even a game changer, it was something more substantial, something more essential for all Ukrainians and also for the world. Let's not miss the very simple thing. Events in Ukraine have an impact on the entire international community. In fact, we see how the whole international security and international relations are being restructured because of events in Ukraine. So we have this double-track reform process. One is to reform the country, and the second one is actually to reform international relations in a way that such things as aggression, as economic pressure and terror are being derooted from our life. And of course, we, as people who represent a new generation of managers, I personally feel double responsibility for what's going on. Reforms, reforming a country is always a big struggle. It's a painful effort. And it depends on our consistency and on our clear understanding of objectives and the way we have to take to achieve this goal, not only in the interests of Ukraine, but also in the interests of Europe as such and the world.
Hanna, what about your experience? You have a very interesting past. Just a few months ago, you were a civil society activist, and now you are on the other side of the fence. So, did your angle change?
I think that my mission and mission of the new generation of change makers is the same, to build a new Ukraine, because more than 5,000 people died for our chance to build a new Ukraine, and we got this opportunity. And it doesn't matter where you are, at civil society side or now in the parliament, so we have to be united and also to show the solidarity that we are ready to sacrifice our time and to build a new Ukraine. And of course now we need finally not to talking but start working on reforms. And there are priorities like anti-corruption, decentralization, judiciary system reforms, law enforcement reforms. And our parliament already passed several legislation. It's a good sign. And also what we need now is to build this network between people from new generations that were born or show up during the Maidan and now due to the situation in the East. And now there are also people professional enough in the parliament, in the government and presidential administrations. And through building the network of these people, we have to use all opportunities to perform reforms. It's important to get international support, financial support, consultations, technical support. It's really important, and the most important issue, what we need, is for everybody abroad to keep Ukraine in heart and remember that Ukrainians fighting now not just for our future. We are fighting for the future of the whole region, for the Europe, and it's important to see these historical parallels from the last century and now, and the role that Ukraine plays now. So, and it's important that now in Davos, our president had a wonderful speech and deliver a lot of messages to the audience of business community and representatives of civil society. So the mission of Ukraine in 21st century in the post-Soviet area is very important, and everybody should understand that investing in Ukraine, all international community investing in their future and stability and peace. So we rely on international support, and from our side, we are ready to do everything possible to reform the country.
Okay, that's clear enough. I think all of you mentioned that you belong to a young generation of managers, of state officials. You are all in your 30s, you are the millennials. Do you feel any generation gap between you and your older colleagues who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s? Do you view them as Soviet, post-Soviet generation in terms of how you and them approach their work, values, and things like that?
Well, I personally have a slightly different criteria, because what I see at the civil service, at the public service as such, is not the age difference, but the mentality difference. There are still, unfortunately, young people, even younger than we are. They're less than 30. But I wish, you know, they were in their 50s or 60s, so I didn't have to be afraid that such people do have a chance for a long career, and they will keep influencing decision-making process. And I have colleagues in their 50s who want change, who want things to change. That's very, very important. So age is a bad judge in this sense. The best thing is actually to see whether the person is committed to reforms, committed to changing, first of all, him or herself. That's the most important thing. If you do not change yourself, you cannot change the system. A corrupt manager cannot build a non-corrupt system. That's as simple as such. Even if he wants to, he just can't. That's very easy. So it's about mentality. As famous Ukrainian author said, Ukraine is not divided as Western, Eastern. It's divided as Soviet and post-Soviet. So that's the whole point. It's all here in minds.
Yeah, it's a very interesting answer. You want to add something?
Just to say that now we have one political nation, and this is the biggest achievement. It's in my view of the revolution of dignity, the dignity revolution. And also there is a gap I agree with Dmytro, between people with post-Soviet mentality and people with Western education and people who want to see Ukraine as a part of European community and other Western countries. So, and Ukraine got his historical chance. And now it's a big responsibility, not just for the new generation of change makers and state builders. It's also a responsibility for European Union and other strategic allies of Ukraine to help us to become a successful country. And this model could be shared in Russia and other countries in the region. And it's important for Ukraine to become economically successful. And this is why it's important building these bridges between our generation and people from the West.
Yeah, sure.
I would only add if it's possible, because I would say from a more practical side of view. In our ministry, we should daily interact with more than 600,000 people, which are under our responsibility. And we do understand that we should talk to them, that we should convince them, that we should keep on dialoguing with them. Otherwise, if we simply put the facts in front of them, that this is Ukraine we want, you should take it or leave it, there is no way out. Because there are too many people who used to live as they were living for some 25, 30, 40 years. It's very difficult, but important to change their minds, to give them future, to explain this future. Otherwise, you will simply get very strong opposition towards, not towards like a present political situation, but opposition against Ukraine, because new Ukraine will be a very dangerous symbol for them.
Mm-hmm. I think what is important to understand for our internet foreign viewers is a very simple thing. We do have a capacity, a human capacity, to reform the country, but these people should receive a chance to reform the country.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. That's all. That's you have to let, it's as a famous song says, let my people go. So in our case, it's let our people do. Just give them chance, appoint them to decision-making positions, set up efficient control mechanisms, because everyone is tempted by various things. So it doesn't mean that we are all angels. It's just we keep moving because we are committed to a certain goal. So building up the system built on new people who will keep moving it forward is the most important thing. So Ukraine is capable of changing itself. All it needs is a support at this critical moment to overcome the tragedy we are living through and develop ourselves as a normal European country.
So, Dmytro, let me follow up on your answer. Your responsibility at the Ukrainian government is to work on Ukraine's international image and, attract investors, attract support, understanding of Ukraine. So you are balancing between, covering war and covering our reforms. How is it possible to, build Ukrainian positive image when we face the aggression, when we face the propaganda war of Russia against us, and at the same time we indeed have a conflict in our country, and how investors can bring in their money in a country which is at war? How are you tackling this difficult situation?
For that purpose, I have a concept that I personally call a mirror concept. In the sense that a man can have scars on his face, can be unshaved, can be not really handsome, but if his eyes are full of energy and honesty, and if he's willing to do something good, then we feel good about him. We want to help him to succeed. It's exactly the same. Mm-hmm. We may be in the middle of a war, in the middle of a conflict. We may have a lot of problems. I mean, none of us will tell you that everything is perfect and we are succeeding on every track. We have millions of problems on every corner and every step we make. But if the world sees that we are committed to changing our country and we're making these painful steps, despite all the obstacles, despite all the confrontations, people will see that we can be trusted because we are honest and we are willing to change. And this is the key word now, trust. Investors always come where they have trust in partners, and Ukraine should be a partner. They will come if they will trust Ukrainians, if they see that Ukrainians can be trusted. That's the whole point, if they see that we are changing. This is why real reforms are so critical. If you introduce at least one difficult reform, people will see that you're actually capable, you can make change, you can deliver on that, and they will trust you and they will invest. So this is part of my job as well, but we are also focused on informing international community about events in Ukraine so they can shape their political positions appropriately, and they will not be buying Russian disinformation that is trying to disseminate widely through its own channels. So everything is complicated, but the key word here is trust. And to be trusted, you have to be honest. That's the key.
Okay. Volodymyr, you are an executive right now. And in Ukraine, we hear a lot of talk about reforms. We have a lot of new laws right now adopted at the parliament. But many experts say that execution is the most difficult part. And you are right now, as the Deputy Minister of Infrastructure, you see for yourself what are the executives in your ministry, are they ready to change? What is the situation there? Do you indeed believe we have the capacity?
You know, I would say that the biggest threat to my country, to our country actually, it's corruption. Secondly, it's inefficient governing. We are trying somehow to get the best people on board. We do not much rely on existing resources, because we know that you can have a super professional, but he is so corrupted that he will never give up his habit, let's say. In our case, it's not appropriate because we do not have a chance to take like a second try or third try. So we can only have time for the first try. So we should do it right way. We are honest, so we get rid of habits, talk differently, act differently, and think the third way. So we say what we do what we say. It was very difficult to, it's a very simple thing, but it was so hard to make people believe you can hardly imagine. Whatever we do, they always think, no, he says this, but it means that he will do 100% opposite. Then you show, no, I did what I said. Okay, so maybe he will play another trick with you after. So every time, every day, we should convince them, yes, we say yes, it means yes. So this is the way we do. Of course, there are a lot of traps along our way, but we are convinced, we are motivated, we have a mission inside of us. So it's a small team right now, maybe for our ministry, it's not more than 30, 40 people. But each of them, it's very brilliant, it's like very bright guys. So they came to us on their own, with their own ideas. There is no post I want, there is no money I want. I just want to help my country. This is actually what we have in Ukraine, wherever we look. War is won by Ukrainian volunteers. If you want to have some success, you should better count on volunteers. Another aspect of the story, we want to have a e-government in our ministry. The first guys I addressed to, they were volunteers, so I collected them all together. We should change everything. We pay like $3,000 for paper inside of the ministry. It's crazy. So it's much better to pay for e-governance and forget about paper production. So it's just like a tiny example.
It's great you mentioned technology and going paperless. Because what I notice you have in common, three of you, is that you rely a lot on communication technology, on Facebook, and you show your transparency by posting every day your updates, what you are doing at your work. And I wanted to ask, do you believe that technology can help us reform further?
Definitely.
For example, specifically, Hanna, about the initiative I heard to webcast the meetings of the committees inside the parliament for general audience to view. Is it going to happen?
Yeah, in our committee we agree already agreed to do it, but also it's important to use technology to communicate with our colleagues. For example, congressmen from Washington, and to discuss the agenda. After passing the Ukraine Freedom Support Act in the United States in December, now it's important to strengthen our relationship with our colleagues in Congress. So using the technology, it's cheaper, it's faster, and of course it's an effective way of communications. And of course we are thinking about this, and also this is a new way of modernize the old approaches that blocking or not helping us to speed up the process with reform.
And what is very important is that if you use technology, you make process transparent. And you, starting from the very simple example that if you check in on Facebook that you are at the Cabinet of Ministers, somebody see you at the seaside, says, oh, come on, you are not there. But in real terms, when you make tenders, when you talk to people, when you make each decision public, you simply post it. And there is no chance that somebody will take this paper or this notes and take it away and say, there is no paper at all.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why so many people are so reluctant about new technologies, because technology is a very strong anti-corruption tool, on the one hand. And the second thing, people, unfortunately, there are many people who are still working as public service officers, who are kind of reluctant to accept any changes, because they have, and this is also a problem of our governance, because people have a perception that if something is going to change, it will definitely change for bad, because nothing good ever happened in their life. Reform is always associated with the failure, with more complications, with more problems, and more duties, and less freedoms. We actually face this problem at MFA, trying to introduce certain technologies. We realize that people are just reluctant to use them for a very simple reason, because they are afraid of change. They do not see changes as an opportunity as we do. Mistakes are inevitable, of course. We're all making mistakes, and we will be making mistakes. But it's important to keep moving forward and not to waste time. So technology is a tricky thing in Ukrainian governance.
In other words, if you want to have some different, you should make it different way. That's it.
Okay, that's excellent. Dear guests, Anna, Volodymyr, Dmytro, thank you for sharing your experience with us, your views. Now we want to have a live cast from Hromadske TV journalist Natalia Gumenyuk, who is also a global shaper. She is right now in Davos at the Ukrainian event, where a group of Ukrainian politicians, activists, media people came to tell the world about the new Ukraine, about the new generation of state builders, about the change that we're going through. Are we ready for Natalia? Oh, great. Natalia, hello.
Yes, I'm listening to you.
Great. Good to hear you, and thank you for joining us. Could you tell us briefly, what is your experience there in Davos? Do you think Ukraine is being heard? Do you think Ukraine is being understood properly? And do you feel there is enough attention to Ukraine and enough desire to assist on the part of the international community?
What I understand from the being here and from talking to the people, that there was a concern if there is some fatigue with the events in Ukraine. I should say it's definitely not here now, especially because of the escalation which is taking. And so there is more in what will happen. And there were a number of the Ukrainian events, and there were here the Ukrainian president, the foreign minister, and as well a number of the minister who are originally foreigners, like financial minister and the economy minister, who were pretty eloquent. There is always an issue with these forums or with these formats when what is expected by the business, by the international community is really to deliver the results already. And it's also the question from the Ukrainian business here. But what we heard from the Minister of the Finance, Natalia Yaresko, probably it was the most interesting and most adequate to say that there shouldn't be that much anticipation or estimation, but just looking at the small steps. The biggest discussion about the Ukrainian reforms are more or less the help is needed, the help is necessary for this help. So that would be more or less the topic. But definitely from those Ukrainian supporters in the international community, they would always say that there is not maybe enough, and as well there is a pressure from business regarding the sanctions towards Russia. You know, the business never likes it, but they somehow understand that there is no other way.
And being there right now in Davos, do you feel that there is any impact of the Russian information campaign against Ukraine in terms of how people perceive the current government of Ukraine?
I think that it's more not about the Russian propaganda campaign, but more about, I think that it's, here at least it's not working. The people who are in Davos, I would say the decision makers, the analysts, the journalists, they're pretty well following what's happening in Ukraine. It's not rather that they would believe in what Russia says, but they would more have some doubts about the capacity of Ukraine to reform itself. So there is a discussion. If you don't, it's more or less the issue of time, because some people, a lot of people expect to deliver things very fast, otherwise there would be the disappointment about Ukraine itself. As there is still this, I won't say well present, I remember the next year. So what I've been speaking with some reporters, and not just reporters, the people here who are often in Davos, they said that, you know, Russia was famous for these parties, for big representations. So there was a discussion on Russia today, on Russia Today as well. There was a panel, and it was perceived a bit weirdly because the Russian ministers, they were speaking about the history, about Catherine the Great, about the Gorbachev, but not really about that they are not afraid of sanction, all the things. So it was a bit out of date discussion, that I would rather say, and that was a bit of surprise.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And you were at Davos last year during Ukraine's Maidan revolution, and now you are there again. Do you feel there was any change in terms of how Ukraine is viewed in the world?
But I think there is a huge difference as for us. I will remember that these days, a year ago, there was a former government who were more or less, afraid to talk in public. They would be hiding somewhere. They would give the press conference at some hotel. Today we have a very, let's say, open government, very present. We have this bunch of the young MPs who arrived here for one of the unofficial events. But that's one thing. The other thing that is more or less the Ukraine is a subject rather than an object. So more or less it's treated as independent, which is also the responsibility for Ukrainians to reform our country and our own.
That's great. Thank you, Natalia, for your insights from Davos. That was really interesting to hear from you. And stay connected and follow our discussion online while we are discussing here in Kyiv.
Yeah, all the best to Kyiv, all the greetings to Davos, Shaping Davos from Davos.
Thank you, Natalia. And we are back in the studio with my second panel of outstanding guests. They represent civil society and the media. From the left to the right, I have Oksana Nechyporenko. She is the coordinator of the Reanimation package of reforms, a civil society initiative. I have Dmytro. He is a very famous investigative journalist in Ukraine and co-founder of Hromadske TV. And I have Andrei Kruglyashov. He's a political expert, and he is the head of Chesna civic movement. So Welcome. Thanks for joining. And I want to start with Andriy, asking you, since you are the one who I think just recently returned from abroad, where you received your education and your experience. You studied in the United States, and I'm really interested to hear this. How do you think foreign education, Western education, is relevant to transforming Ukraine? Why there is so much talk about Western education today? And what do you think about the foreigners at the Ukrainian government? Do you see it as a positive trend, given your foreign experience? Did your views change from before you went to study abroad and after you study abroad? What has changed?
Yes, I think it's a life-changing experience, especially when you have the chance to study, live, and work in the foreign country, especially such a foreign country as the United States of America. For me, it was not the first experience. I lived in Canada for more than 2 years with interruption. Lived and worked in Moscow, but really, United States is the system that gives you much more freedom and much more responsibility. So it is vital for us, if we want to transform things, not just to keep things as they are, to unleash the initiative. What was the mistake of the big reformers of the past, so-called reformers, who really failed to bring strong change in society, like Peter the Great, emperor of Russia, first emperor of Russia. He wanted to impose change and reforms, but still keep people enslaved. But United States, they always unleash the initiative, the creativity. Sure, you have your skin in the game. You are materially responsible for your life. You don't have such a security net as we used to have, or we perceived to have in Soviet times. But it really gives you you can change something when you practice things differently. You just cannot learn and read okay, I read something in a book and I will replicate it here. Those people who were changing the United States, like people like Martin Luther King, and I had the chance to learn in the school named after his close friend, the key negotiator of civil rights movement. It really prepared me to understand how change can occur in Ukraine. But actually, when everything happened, I returned 4 days before Euromaidan. I understood that I'm not really prepared for what is going on.
Well, that's exactly what I mean, because, for example, many would say that, like you study international economy in the States, or like Oksana, you're now studying in the UK. But how relevant is this knowledge for Ukraine, where we don't have a real, market economy? We are not integrated into the global economy fully. We have our own hybrid post-Soviet economy. How would you address that?
But I would still say that Ukraine is a part of a global economy. We are globalized. So there are some logical rules of the game that work in most of the parts of the world. So, and the same, you can use the knowledge that you get during getting the Western education is the same. Some principles, some issues, some tools can be used in Ukraine in different situations. So there are some global rules that work all the time. Plus, while learning any Western education, you not just get some tools or some knowledge, you also get the understanding of the values. And you understand the way how the Western society is being educated, and you see some things that you didn't notice before, like these issues of zero-sum game in post-Soviet countries and win-win approach in the negotiations in Western countries. So some things like that, and they give you the opportunity to understand that and to use it and implement it in Ukraine, because we are not closed. We have an enormous, I hope, already a much bigger population and generation of people who know what is West, what is global, and you start speaking the same language with them.
Okay, that's good. You both mentioned values. Dmytro, as someone who's really experienced in anti-corruption investigations, do you think foreigners are less corrupt?
I'm a little bit confused because you call me very famous journalist investigator. This is not true. So I'm just an ordinary reporter, and yes, last 8 years of my professional experience, this is a journalist investigations. About foreign countries and the level of corruption, you know, my good friend, he tells regularly that whole world is like Ukraine, but just bigger. So we see that in European countries, obviously, a level of corruption and facts of corruption not so wide and not so awful like in Ukraine, but the same corruptional facts and corruptional dealers also exist in Europe. So our little investigative team from Hromadske TV, this is a part of the biggest in Europe investigative network, OCCRP, Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. So our colleagues in Europe exposed during last 5 years many corruptional deals in Europe, in European countries, members of EU, for example. My colleague Paul Radu from Romania, he exposed very loud corruptional deal in Europe when meat of Romanian horses transferred to Europe and sold in European markets like beef. And that was very, very loud corruptional scandal in Europe. And for example, our colleagues from Czech Republic, they exposed that not that part of European agriculture producers used money allocated for subsiding, yes, for supporting of central agriculture production. They used like dummy companies. So these guys, our colleagues, exposed that big part of agricultural produced didn't exist yet, but they took near 600 million euros for supporting of agricultural production.
Okay. Well, thank you. Well, it's okay. It's clear.
So this is just a question of comparison.
Of course,
yes, sure.
There are corrupt people everywhere.
I also want to add on top of it. I was lucky in this September to be a part of IVLP program in USA, and while being to one of the leading journalist investigative agencies in Chicago, the CEO of this agency, who had a whole number of investigations, naming buying Congress or buying the president, he said, welcome to USA, the country where the system is legally corrupted. So the idea that we're talking about is that all the system of lobbying,
institutional corruption, yeah, sure.
And also we spoke about the number of cases of corruption, but the major difference between Ukraine and USA is that in USA you do have the system of, you have the independent judicial system, and you do know what is the punishment for it, and it usually being implemented. So.
Okay, let's talk a little bit where Ukraine is moving in terms of its anti-corruption reform, because we see, according to all the polls, different groups in society think that corruption measures are critical for Ukraine. We can hear this from foreign investors, and we can hear it from the population. Do you think we are on the right track? Do you see less corruption in Ukraine?
Hopefully, we see more of the entire pool of corrupt activities than we see before, because when we talk about corruption, it's like a tip of an iceberg. We see only what we see. But what concerns me is that often we perceive this as weather. Corruption in Ukraine is like a weather outside this window. It's something that we are not in control of. But in fact, by reshaping institutions the way that the corrupt behavior would be not as beneficiary, not as easy, and sometimes better often than rarely punished, then it will gradually decrease. The Reanimation package of reforms did a really good job in lobbying such an anti-corruption package of reforms. Though, what I would stress on is that people need to learn the ways of getting things done without corruption. Because the struggle for corruption, you can make a career on that, and we are not, but always fighting this beast, but not changing. It will always reoccur as a hydra. What we need is to ensure people, here guys is the way, a simple way of getting things done. Like, my wife, Veronica, she likes to say, remember when we were buying tickets for the trains? These women, these ladies in the window who were selling tickets, they were gods. They were gods. They were backed to book the lower bench.
They were
so
in position of power.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But now you just do it via internet, and you give her the code, and that's it. You have your ticket. So step by step, it's possible. It's Ukraine. What's wrong with mentality? Nothing wrong with mentality. People really use these services and are getting rid of corruption, perhaps on the lower level, because institutional corruption in states is huge, though people really feel big discomfort by not being able to reach their life goals in a decent, honest way on their local level. They don't encounter this big institutional corruption this often in their lives. But I would say one word in defense of corruption, in sense of that for people, it's often the way to create the barrier, to insert the pillow between injustice, stupid bureaucratic machine, or even violent, harsh machine of oppression, which is prosecution, police, so that people defend themselves. Yes, absolutely. Because when corruption can be obliterated, but if we obliterate it by not empowering people to stand for their rights, it will be the worst oppression that could be imagined.
Okay, what about punishment? Polls show that Ukrainians want their officials in prison, and the Anti-Corruption Bureau is about to be created. What do you think? Will it be a game changer? Will it put some top officials to prison? And when?
No one knows, but if you want to know my opinion, I don't believe in this very effectiveness practice of this anti-corruption bureau, because anti-corruption bureau, even if we hire 700 of honest guys in this bureau during the year or during a couple of years, this bureau can arrest 1,000 of corruptional Ukrainian officials, but whole official staff in Ukraine, this is 1,200,000 people. that this is a whole volume of Ukrainian bureaucracy. What's the 1,000 from 1,200,000 people? This is just a drop in the sea. This is the first of all. Second, you know, there is a common thing, very well-known and effective practice for fighting with corruption. This is not only creating some very good, strong, and very crucial bureaus for fighting with corruption. First of all, this is a declining of quantity of some kind of licenses, deregulation, yes, license, some kind of bureaucracy documents and procedures. And how can we estimate this process? Absolutely ineffectiveness, absolutely fail. So as we see, very corrupted government specific structures like ecology inspection, like vet and medical inspection, fire inspection, and so on, anti-monopoly committee, and near three dozens of such government structures that just try to sink money from economy and from businessmen. They're still alive, yes, and no one from government or from president's office, no one wanted to fight with these people, because firing of these officials in these 3 dozens of absolutely inefficient government structures. These people are your tomorrow electioners. This is a people who will vote on next elections, and our president and prime minister think about these people as voters, not as inefficient officials. Yes.
Okay. I would add on the whole aspects of anti-corruption laws. I think that the fact, answering your first question, whether we are on the track, whether it's right, I think that the fact that in October the package of anti-corruption laws, also the law on anti-corruption bureau, was adopted by the old parliament was a good sign. Was a sign that basically we are at least thinking of starting to do something with the corruption. I would also add that these details on the anti-corruption bureau law, there was a huge fight on it, and there is still a fight, because we have now a very optimistic commission that should offer the director of the bureau. But now there is an argument between the authorities and the civil societies whether president should appoint the only one representative by the director.
It's about the process, how the head will be selected.
Yes, whether it will be selected from 3, and the president will select, and then he will have some power on it, or the commission will select and then offer. But the whole idea is that we are going that way, and I think that is good. And also adding on deregulation, I would agree that it's a huge issue for Ukraine, for Ukrainian business, which basically expects for the authority to start doing some good steps, not adopting this strange tax reform that they did, but to do some real deregulation. But also the issue that we started the EU integration process, and one of the laws that was adopted, there was a law on technical standards, and this law also eliminates some of these authorities that give the licenses and tell the business how to standardize their products. So it's basically now will be eliminated and will open the doors for Ukrainian business to trade with EU and to choose themselves how to license it. So basically the work is starting. It's not the biggest problem is that one of the problems is that we are not going the way of the reforms as fast as we thought we will go. Or after all these victims of Maidan, we thought that we paid such a high price that the reforms should start immediately, and especially the anti-corruption. So it's not going that way. We see that there is a huge system resistance.
So we are going slowly. But I wanted to ask, you are both outsiders. You are not in the government, you are watchdogs from the media, from the civil society. Can you tell us, do you see the new quality of Ukrainian officials, the new quality of leadership after the Maidan?
In general?
Yeah.
No, absolutely, because as we see, mostly this new Ukrainian government or new Ukrainian elite, this is a mostly representatives of old political players, of old political actors linked very closely with previous government, with previous power. Because, you know, we made many investigations that Mr. Yatsenyuk linked with relatives or business, some kind of links with Leonid Yurushev. This is a banker of Yanakiyeva clan, the main supporting group of ex-president Yanukovych, for example. And Mr. Poroshenko linked different business connections with Mr. Akhmetov or Mr. Kolesnikov. This is a bright representatives of Donetsk clan. So this is not, and we see that facts that convince this not only some connections between new government and old government, we see this in the steps. Because this government and this president administration, they see on policy making like circus show. They think that policy, this is some art of be kind, be good, be bright politician, and so on. But normal European or Western modern thinking and quality of policy making, this is a making of decision making process. And yes, and these guys, they showed absolutely zero result in decision-making process. For example, what kind of real structural reforms made Yatsenyuk government? We think
they are now hiring new patrol police.
Good for them.
Patrol police?
The Ministry of Internal Affairs and now restructuring. They started this.
Results.
But they are kind of starting only right now.
Yes, starting, but almost one. Yes.
No, I agree with you. But what about your former colleagues, people from your community, journalists? They became deputies.
MPs.
And people from Reanimation package of reforms from civil society became MPs and state officials. What about them? Are they change makers?
Absolutely. And these people, this is a real new generation in Ukrainian policy. Not Mr. Yatsenyuk or not Mr. Dovgy. They are representatives of all generation of Ukrainian policy.
Old system.
Political system, yes, political system. But our colleagues, former journalists or combats Ukrainian, yes, or
the battalion commanders,
civic activists. These people are in new generation of Ukrainian policymakers. You know,
so these are good news.
Yes.
I would agree that we do have these new politicians and new civil servants who basically went from their businesses and good paid jobs as CEOs and went to the to become MPs or to become civil servants. It's a good sign. And we as representatives of Reanimation package of reforms, we work a lot with the MPs, and it's much more easier to work work with this parliament. We have really lots of new MPs who are reforms-oriented, who are open for cooperation, and who are sincerely interested to make changes in Ukraine. The problem is that it's like a cherry picking. We have only a number of them, and they are not yet. It's not yet a critical mass of them to change the system yesterday. So it's just the start. And the problem.
But this is a question of time, you know.
Yes.
Critical.
That's, I would agree. And the problem, or the
Yatsenyuk and Poroshenko became older and older. Yes.
That's true. That's true. So anyway, sooner or later, you know, they will be changed. But the idea is that we have to create the opportunities for more of these leaders to come into power. Because for now, sometimes we see that if you put just one person, genius, but one person into this system, he can't change by himself. He needs a team of people. He needs also some political support and political will. But we do see that we now have much more partners in the authority to work with, both in the cabinet of ministers, in different agencies, and in the parliament.
And what do you think about this tendency that after the revolution, civil society activists become politicians themselves? It happened not only in Ukraine, during Arab Spring. There is an idea that there should be a critical mass of civil society activists who should stay outside because they need to control those new government officials. What happened in Ukraine? Do you think we had enough people who stayed in civil society? How do you estimate this proportion of this, you know, civil society activists moving to power? Because some people would say, for example, that because so many journalists left, now we have wicked journalism. Or it's not a problem for Ukraine?
Not so many, because a lot of people stay in journalism, a lot of people stay in civic society. So this is a good compliment for Ukrainian civic society and journalism. So many people from your profession became to get to the power. This is not true, because a little part of civic society and from journalism came to power, but bigger part stay still in profession and in civic society, in civic activity. And
they control their former colleagues as strict as they would.
Yes, we have many scandals. Yes. Many scandals and clearing of our relations, and they are our former colleagues. They are under strong criticism from former.
You have higher expectations.
Yes, I would also add that. Basically, when our partners from civil society told us that they are going to run for MPs, we told them that for them the expectations are even higher, and we will be more strict to them than to other MPs, because there are so much hopes on them put. This is A. And B, what I would add, that I would see the whole pipeline. I would say that after the Euromaidan, more people joined civil society as such. So more people from business, from other spheres, they decided that they would try to go to the civil society. And then, yes, some representatives of civil society went to the power, and I do know that they had a lot of moral thinking before going there, whether they should do it or they shouldn't. So, but I think that the civil society stays strong, and more people join into the civil society, and we have to produce more and more good resources for the future, for authority also.
Well, let's come back to reforms. I was wondering, in terms of lobbying reforms, there are, I would say, three groups. There are some young reformers inside the government, inside the presidential administration, inside the parliament. There are activists in media who push for reforms, and there are Western donors, the IMF, the EU, who demand reforms. But do you think they all agree, they are on the same page in terms of what reforms they need? And also, are they on the same page with the Ukrainian people? Why I'm asking this? Because, for example, when I read the recent poll where Ukrainians were asked which reform is the most important for them, they voted for reform of healthcare, because this is the basic survival. If we have bad healthcare, it's really critical. But then IMF is telling us more about, of course, austerity, about cutting budget, and activists are focused more on corruption. How do you see, is there any alignment, is there any conflict, or there is no conflict of interest and ideas in this field?
I don't see any big conflict in trying of understanding of the reforming process. Because, you know, some groups of people may have some different views on this reforming process. What should be first, what should be second, be done, be reformed. But in general, Ukrainian society has common view on the reforming, and this common position, this is a fighting with corruption. And fighting with corruption divided on several several directions. First of all, this is fighting with corruption in law enforcement structures and courts, because even you businessman or even you just technical worker, you cannot expect on honest judiciary in these countries. So you have not so whole rights like people in developed countries. Yes. So first of all, this is a reforming on law enforcement structures and courts. Second, and providing the reforms in these spheres, sure will change health and education, because partly, in part, partially, yes. Yeah. Second, this is a changing of this is an administrative reform and changing of government structure and changing of bureaucracy. Yes, of Ukrainian bureaucracy. And third, this is a changing of social sphere. So as for me, this is a common view on the reforming Ukrainian society and Ukrainian economy and Ukrainian bureaucracy, generally from different social groups.
Yeah, Dmytro, but you are the co-founder of Hromadske TV, and this is an independent television, and I know that you educate your audience, Ukrainian population, about reforms a lot. But we have the rest of the media channels, they are owned by the oligarchs, which you have mentioned in our conversations, and they are basically not interested to educate their people about some critical reforms which may be against the interests of those oligarchs. How do we tackle this challenge? And maybe you can join, Oksana, if you have.
This is not a goal of media to make a strong propaganda of reforms. This is not a goal of journalism. The main goal of journalism is this to allocate honest information to people, balanced information to people, not making on some kind of propaganda or some kind of propaganda of reforms. So when we will have good law enforcement structures, honest law enforcement structures, and honest courts, so Ukrainian oligarchs will not have ability and will not have some tools for improvement of editorial policy of these media. First of all, this will I don't know, maybe we will clear this process. We will divide improvement from oligarchs to media and to policy making. You know.
Okay,
I would add that basically the educating the population and the active voters that reforms are not only needed, but reforms can be very painful is a huge challenge that I think that if you look generally, we didn't even start doing that. Because some of the reforms, like you said, medical reform, they really will bring, it's not like tomorrow you adopt the law, the day after it's implemented, and the day after you already live in a great new healthy country and anti-corrupted country and everything is okay. No, it means that there is a huge way for example, for pension reform. Yesterday we spoke with the experts that if you would start tomorrow, you will see the final benefits you will see in the year 2040, not 14 or 40. Or the same is for medical reform. It is very problematic reform, and there are different ways how to do it. So the issue of communicating with the people is the task of our authority, of our government, of our parliament, of the civil society. There should be a huge work done on the regional level to conduct a real national dialogue and to find the solutions that are eligible for Ukraine. And the idea is that the reforms should be done not only by our authority or by civil society or journalists should do it, but reform should also start in the people's mind. This is something that we just only after Euromaidan we started understanding that. So for the first time in Ukrainian history, we started seeing these energy efficiency issues really came into the home of each Ukrainian, and then you start thinking how to do it. The same is about the anti-corruption system. It should start with the people who would understand that the bribes is not something that you should do, and so it's the whole logic. And I think that we are not doing enough to communicate the reforms issues to the citizens of Ukraine. And they, well, maybe, you know, there was word reforms. I think in some time for the general population it will become like a not really good word, because everybody is now using it and basically manipulating. They name each law or each action or each step a reform, which is not.
It's not.
And basically we do know that reform is something systematic, and it really takes some
something
time.
that people see in their real
and they
life.
have to feel, yeah.
When I see a new policeman in a new uniform who is not corrupt, this is the reform. So have we seen any reforms like that since Maidan?
Yes. Because, you know, despite on any sociological research and any sociological analysis, Ukrainian society has very strong demand on reforms, and people just wait these reforms, and they like trying to call to government, okay, guys, no matter what kind of reforms you will start, but just start for any reforms, yes? Okay. For example, it will be reforming of policy, yes, or reformer or military, yes, or health, medical, or pension reform, yes, but just start any reforming process. So even some reforming process.
But Ukrainian officials would often respond that we cannot focus on reforms because we are focused on war.
You know, as far as I remember, Mr. Yatsenyuk, in his previous time being the prime minister, he promised to EU and to the whole world that the war can't be the excuse for reforms. No, we should do it. As far as I remember, last time he was speaking with the EU officials, he told that because of the war we can't do the reforms. So basically, the idea of some experts from the civil society is that, you know, Ukraine already had such a way through all of these problems and corruption that we are basically now on the bottom, and we don't have other way than to go up, because there is already nowhere to go down. So we think that the war can't be the excuse for doing reforms. On the opposite side, we need now to focus our forces, and now the population is still ready for the changes, and they want and they demand changes. And we owe these reforms to the people on Maidan and to the people who are now fighting in the East for us here to have the opportunity to do reforms, not to do the excuses. So, and I think this is something that the active voters, the civil society and the media is united. we will push the government, the parliament, and all of the president to do the real reforms. We will be the watchdogs, and hope now, thankfully, we do have some partners in Ukrainian authorities for this.
I have nothing. I know nothing about Mr. Yatsenyuk. Every day drives tank or heavy armored machine on the forward line of battle. Yeah.
He's here in Kyiv, where we have peaceful city. We have our government fully functioning, so they can do it. And what about young people? They were the ones who initiated Maidan revolution, and we know that they are very pro-European. They want the visa-free regime with Europe. They want Ukraine to be member of the EU. But how can we channel this positive energy of young people into changing Ukraine? Do you see any recipes?
No, I would just add, sometimes the question that I was asked after the Euromaidan revolution in Europe is whether you stood there to become a member of EU. And I always answered not. We didn't stood on Maidan just because we wanted to become the EU member. We stood there because of some values which for us the EU represented in that time. We stood for a freedom of choice of our country. So I think that I'm also one of the representatives of this young generation, because before Euromaidan I was working only in business. I wasn't connected into civil society at all. And the Euromaidan made me change my mind, and I thought that probably some of my knowledge or skills can be good for either in the civil society or in the government. And I do know a lot of my friends and colleagues who never were thinking of joining the authorities, the government, the parliament, or the civil society, and they're now doing it, partially or fully, but they are involved. And also, I think this volunteering, this huge volunteering movement that we have now in Ukraine, this is also an opportunity for these new people, for these new generations of leaders to utilize themselves.
To engage.
Yes.
That's excellent. What do you think, Dmytro, about this?
8 years ago, in my blog in Ukrainskaya Pravda, I wrote about generation of pink shirts. That was post about Ukrainian generation of zeros, yes? Generation of
millennials.
Millennials, yes, millennials. But what's the name for this generation of 10 years, of 15?
Those who are in their
20s?
20s?
No, 20s. It will be next generation.
Yeah, next generation.
Next generation. But what about present generation? Z?
Z. It's generation Z.
Okay.
I guess.
So, millennium generation in Ukraine, generation of last 10 years, that was generation of pink shirts, because according to many sociological research, that young people, so how do you imagine, how do you know these people to be? What kind of profession they wanted to get in after
school?
Yeah, not after school, but after university. But what kind of profession? What 10 years ago?
They wanted to be MPs.
MPs, yes. Politicians, yes.
I know that.
Yes, they wanted to be politicians because you have money, you have popularity, and you have not to do many hard merger.
Yeah, no work but good lifestyle. What about now? What do they want to become?
This generation, as we see, this generation don't. Young people of these years, present years, they don't want to get a lot of money. They don't want to get bubble huge popularity. Yes, they want to be happy, to be themselves, yes, and
self-realization.
Yes, self-realization, and to live in, first of all, in country without lying, in honest country, in honest society. okay, it will be less money, less comfort, yes, but they don't want to lie. In social relations, they don't want they don't want hear lie from politicians, they don't want lie to parents, and so on. This is for me, and this is a biggest achievement of our social and political development, I mean, Ukrainian society. We have generation that more honest than generation of millennium.
And free. I would say that
And
they also
yes,
freedom
and more
for them
free,
is
yes. So no matter where these young people try to realize the ambitions or the professional skills or habits and so on, no matter, they will be journalists, lawyers, politicians, and officials. They want to be honest, not to be generation of pink shirts, as I see.
Yes. Okay, well, thank you for this very honest and insightful discussion. Thank you, Dmytro. Thank you, Oksana. And thank you for watching Shaping Davos event. Thank you to Hromadske TV. And please send your questions and feedback to the Shaping Davos survey that Kyiv Hub is now conducting online. This was Olena Trehub, and goodbye.